Awesome. All right. So we have week two of So You Want to Talk About Race, the book club that we're doing in conjunction with our Black History Month initiative, Fill in the Gaps. So thank you all for being here with us. We went over chapters 1 to 3 last week, and it was really amazing. And week two is proving to be even more amazing. So excited to go through it with y'all. So chapter 4, we're talking about. Want to make sure I'm on the right chapter. Privilege, right? So for those of you who haven't read yet, it's called Why Am I Always Being Told to Check My Privilege? All right. Does anyone want to start and maybe discuss anything that resonated with them the most, or read a section that you feel might be a great start to the discussion? If not, I have notes and I'm happy to start as well.
I thought it was sorry, I was just going to jump in. I thought it was very interesting personally to see her perspective on her own privilege. It was interesting to me because I never thought about that. I never thought that that is something that she could have experienced. But let me go back. I do want to read just a little part. Okay, so in it, as for everyone who read it, or if you haven't read it, she's talking about this group in Seattle that she has. This group of other people who are Black and they're artists and photographers, and they talk about very like awesome worldly things. They are having a picnic, and these men come up, and these are obviously men from the basketball court. That look very different than they do. And she says in there how, let me find it real quick. It says, but if we weren't going to be there for and with all people of color, we should probably at least stop pretending to be creating a radical space of acceptance and just admit that we were simply a social club for comfortable people of color.
What page is that, Danny? Danny, I think you cut out. Can anyone hear her? Because I can't. Okay. Danny, I don't know what happened, but I can hear you.
Maybe put it in the chat.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah, what page did you read that?
Sorry, I'm on 58.
58, cool.
Yeah. But it's funny to see how social groups can still kind of have, it doesn't matter what race you are, but social groups can always have like this sort of difference of class or hierarchy or clickiness to it. And it's interesting to see those play out in the racial issues that also play out today.
Yeah. I feel like Moni, I feel like we've spoken about this within our own like cultures, because like I know, especially with like Black women, paper bag test is a really, really like real thing, right? So if you're a lighter skinned Black person, it's like equates to being more beautiful, or like what's more acceptable for the society, like social norms, right? So I know we've discussed that. So I'd be interested in hearing specifically with like, what you've encountered or experienced, how this like it shows up.
Yeah, absolutely. This story, like, it made me also think about hospitality a lot. And Lauren, we've also spoken about this with like, a lot of the groups that are coming up now, and the more and more the people in hospitality are speaking about how we're trying to better this industry. And it's like, absolutely, those conversations should totally be happening. But are we only trying to better things for our elite cocktail bar people and like chef driven fine dining restaurant people? Like, are we ignoring the whole section of like fast food workers and caterers and all of these people that are not in our like little bubble? So this made me think about that so much, and just like that sense of it. And then also as far as like my personal identity of like, yeah, I I'm an Arab woman, but I'm also like, it's like all the privileges, you know, you think about the marginalization, and then it's like, okay, but I'm also a Christian Arab woman. I don't have to wear hijab. I'm very liberal for that. You know what I mean? And it's like, okay, yeah, these are my disadvantages where I feel like I don't belong, but here are also so many privileges that I get to benefit from that a lot
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah, I think the thing that really was awesome was her definition of privilege, and then obviously how she leads into her explanation by using her own experience. So it's like, as a Black woman, it resonates with me because I'm like, oh man, I've totally been that person. And it's just like, and you know, like how can I see that within myself and implement that change? And then obviously I'm sure as, you know, a non-Black woman or as a man, it's like, shit, like I can totally, like that also resonates with me because I can see that within myself as well. So it's just a really great opportunity to, again, take that moment, pause, and say like, all right, how do I see this in myself so that when I am engaging those conversations with others, I'm not defensive, that it's not like, oh, that's not true. It's like, okay, there's validity in that. And now how do we move forward and ensure that, you know, I can use that to my advantage to implement change?
For sure. I also really love the part where she went into talking about privilege in the perspective of explaining her own privilege, where it's like her college degree. She's like, yes, I worked my ass off for this college degree.
Yeah.
However, you know, I came from a house with a college educated mother who instilled that importance in me. I had all of these other privileges that helped me in getting there, and I loved that. And it's that I've found really helpful in having conversations with people, because I feel like when you point out their privileges, they're like, well, I worked really hard for this, and it's like, yeah, you absolutely did. No one's saying that you didn't, but you also have to acknowledge these other factors that you get there.
Yeah, you're right. And it's funny because I can think of when I was younger, probably like 23, I was just starting out in the food and beverage industry and I had a nursing degree. And I spoke a very certain way and I straightened my hair and I wore very nice clothes. And there were plenty of other people who were way more qualified than me to be a manager at a food and beverage restaurant. I had 1 year experience, and that degree and my eloquent speaking and the way that I dressed, really, that was instilled in me. That was something that I had known my entire life, was very much privilege in that situation. And I have to acknowledge that, right? And what I love about her explanation of this privilege is like, you shouldn't discredit the accomplishments that you have, but you need to understand that they do provide you with these advantages, right? So it was just it was plain and clear and simple. It was a reality check for me. Like, okay, yeah, wake up, you know? Does anyone else have anything to add about that?
I just thought it was really enlightening to hear it described as thinking of your privilege as how that at any time, if what you've experienced, there's been other people have experienced disadvantages because of your advantages.
Yes.
And I think that really kind of triggered something in me to like, this is a great point of conversation with some of my other white female friends who have all often when the conversations of race have come up, they've always pointed to, well, I had to do this and I worked super hard, which to her point in the book is true, but there have been a lot of other people that have been disadvantaged. And to really think of it that way, I think opens up a whole door of a way to communicate and talk about it, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, it's so important. It's like a domino effect. It's like, yeah, cool. Like, yeah, you've had, you know, difficulties and hardships, but how have those moments where you haven't experienced that affected someone else, right?
It's funny we mentioned that, and that this is the chapter that we start off with, because recently Igioma on her personal Instagram page went live, and there was a conversation about names and how people who obviously have an obvious like culturally different name, and then
Oh, Moni, we talked about this.
did you? And she talks about how here comes this white woman who's very obviously white, and she says, "Yeah, my name is Dana, and people or my name is Dana, and people like to call me Dana all the time. So I totally get what you're talking about." And she's like, "But no." And so, people wanted to go in defense of the woman who was sharing her story in defense of Dana. And, then there's a whole slew of other Danas, I guess you could say, that are also trying to come to this defense. And it's like, but what are you talking about? I've shared this experience. And they're like, no, you haven't. You haven't shared this experience. And this is the difference. Like,
the difference is it negatively affects you. Like this person being called Shadesha versus Lauren can't get a job. Yes. You being called Dana versus Dana doesn't prevent you from, those opportunities.
It goes, and this whole chapter totally reminded me of another book that I read by Austin Channing Brown, and how she would talk about how she has a name of a white man, and it would surprise the people when she would go in, because she would have phone interviews and stuff. She would go in person to these interviews, and it's like, oh, you're a Black female. Like, well, you're a female, that's fine, but you're Black, and the shock. And then not only that, but the way she wore her hair, because she at the time would have long dreads. And it's like, it's so, it starts to make you think and really pulls out, that's true. You don't see a whole lot of people in the corporate world that have dreads, and it's socially acceptable, but it's socially acceptable because it's their culture. You know what I mean? And so it's just weird to see the whole, it just goes into a ripple effect of how it gets treated. And it's like how, and I liked how she had pointed out in there, this is switching gears a little bit, how she pointed out in there how people don't like to talk about privilege because they realize how uncomfortable or how it makes them feel when you talk about privilege. Right? Because they don't want to say, well, I have this thing and you should be upset because you don't have this thing.
So. Yeah. No, it's a great point. And then everything you just said reminds me of chapters 1, 2, and 3 so much, which is why I really love the way it flows. And one of the things I know that I read about, because I was trying to think, how was she so strategic and intentional about the way she set the chapters up? And the reason she set it up so that privilege was before intersectionality is because you need to understand what privilege is in order to understand how intersectionality affects all of us, right? But backing up before I get into that, one of the things that was in this chapter that was so crazy to me was thinking about how she described the experience of being a part of that club, that group. She was like, it was eloquent, Black women with dreads and locks, and they were all happy. And this really is interesting because it's when we're so involved in our own experiences, it takes that one moment to give us a reality check to realize how it affects everyone outside of our bubble or our circle, right? So, that interaction she had with those 2 Black men, for her in that moment, it was like, oh, wow, I realized we created something wonderful, but it wasn't for that type of Black person. And I was like, damn, that's so crazy. And it made me really think about the work I do every day. It's am I, and in the best possible way, because I want to ensure that these spaces are actually inclusive. We say equitable and we say inclusive all the time, but it's are we really creating those spaces? So I was like, you know what, this is a really great point. And it's a really great perspective. So now I'm going to intentionally force myself to consider that.
Yeah.
I also love that it creates, sorry, I didn't mean to cut, I'm sorry if I cut. But it also, I love how she talks about how it totally opened up her conversations that she would have when she would do public speaking engagements, when she would teach courses, when she would, do all of this thing and all of these things in her work, and how it completely opened things up to a much broader perspective. And it changed her work to be more, when she started opening her perspective up, it started opening up her work, and it started making a bigger difference. And I'm just like, wow, that's really awesome. I love that I got to listen to that moment where her perspective changed and see where it helped open up her work and stuff, because I mean, honestly, I look at like this book in general and the other books that she's written, and it's wild to think that this person is just so like humble, but also creating change in the way that she's able to categorize all these subjects and break them down. But
Yeah.
anyway, sorry, Maureen.
And that she's human and learning, right? Like
Yeah.
that it's a process, which is such a beautiful thing, because we
so human.
yeah,
which is-
we can be so hard on ourselves when we're talking about these things, but it's like, you're gonna fuck it up. Like she even says it, you're gonna fuck up, and that's okay. Like, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, that part when she was explaining that story of you know, having the you know, POC community that she was in, and then realizing it was like so exclusive and it didn't include everyone, like that's something that in the like Middle Eastern community in the United States is something that I've been like talking to my family more and more, because in Michigan there's like a really huge population of Christian Arabs, like the most population of Christian Arabs outside of the Middle East, especially this ethnic group called Chaldeans, which my family is Chaldean. But like they have their own community in Detroit, and it's very much like this amazing, like beautiful sense of community outside of, you know, home. But they're also so elitist towards people that are like when my family goes out there, like, you know, we get kind of like looked down upon, and partially is because my mom's Egyptian, and you know, there's a whole sense of colorism and weird racism within your own community. But then also it's like the Muslim community in Michigan isn't really welcome within that other Arab community of, you know, Chaldean Arabs, and it's like, you know, just starting to think about those things, and a lot of it in the Middle East has to do with religion, but it's still just like a really weird, old, like messed up way of looking at it. And you know, a lot of younger people within the community now are starting to realize these harmful things that we've carried with us from the home country,
Yeah.
being like, well, we can have the privilege of not doing that here, you know. So
Yeah, that's a really great point. It's a really great point. And then, you know, something that I've really thought about in 2020 leading into now is and I hate to speak in absolutes, but it's that how many of us forget that there's a whole entire world outside of the United States. So when we consider topics and issues, yeah, Fiona, we always think of it from an American perspective.
I'm in Berlin, guys. Sorry.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah,
So
and it's so, yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
This is my
You
first
proved my point.
paper, so I just wanted to see how it works. And,
Yeah. Thanks for joining. Have you read the chapters?
yeah, actually, I didn't know you were gonna talk about these chapters, but I'm now in like chapter 7 or.
Oh, nice. Perfect. Yeah, we're doing 4, 5, and 6 today. So awesome. Any comments about chapter 4 that, or anything that like, you know, sticks with you?
No, like what you guys have said, like just a big eye opener, and especially because I've always been very preoccupied with including females, and you realize that you've actually shut doors sometimes.
Yeah.
To other people, which is yeah, and also how, because I find it very hard to understand many times because it's from the US.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to apply certain situations here, but of course, it's still something that happens here as well.
Yeah.
It's just different. So
is it a less extreme? It's just difficult to explain, I imagine.
Yeah, I think it's just much different, especially because nobody speaks that much about politics. So yeah, but I like it because it opens my mind to many other thoughts that, for example, people that are here are not thinking, and then I can think together, you know, like, so this is what's happening in the US and this is how they're doing it. So that's what we could attempt, you know.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Man, well, thanks for being here. That's awesome.
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Awesome. Man, chapter 4 is a good chapter, y'all. There were 2 quotes I wanted to read really quickly. And then I think we should go on to chapter 5. So on page 65, she says, when we identify where our privilege intersects with somebody else's oppression, we'll find our opportunities to make a real change. And I just want to point that out because it's like something I think I'm just going to replay in my head. And then she goes on to talk about like questions that we can ask ourselves in regards to privilege, which is a great reference. And then on page 66, she says, the number of people I'd be leaving behind and continuing to oppress by refusing to check my privilege would make my efforts ineffective at best and harmful at worst. And then further down, being privileged doesn't mean that you are always wrong. And people without privilege are always right. It means that there's a good chance you are missing a few very important pieces of the puzzle. So yeah, I have those like highlighted in my book, and I'm just going to go back and reference them. And I hope that those words kind of stuck with all of y'all as well. There's a part on page 67 where she talks a little bit about leaning into uncomfortability. It's not the first time we see it in the book, but I do think it's important. So it's in the middle, or more like a third down on the first paragraph. Get used to that uncomfortable feeling that arises when you discover that perhaps your privilege is hindering your ability to truly understand or address an issue. And I mean, if I'm being really honest, I have to see this within myself as well. I mean, I was adopted. I was, we were not rich by any means, but my parents never made us feel like we didn't have things or we couldn't have things. And I always had the best education, and that's not what many Black females can say growing up in the Bronx. So I'm very privileged in that respect and in that way. So this does, and I feel like I have to say this just because it's important, this does still apply to me as well. And I think and that's why I think I love that she includes her perspective and her personal experiences when she's discussing these really, really important topics. Because sometimes I think folks, because it's not their experience, cannot see it within someone else.
I think, yeah, she kind of, in taking that metaphor, that situation that she was, having that picnic with that group at the start and then unpacking that over the duration of the chapter, she kind of makes this point that community feels great. And when you stumble upon community, like surrounding yourself with people that you don't need to explain where you're coming from, that's a beautiful thing. But that becomes exclusive and cliquey and clubby, and you put like borders all of a sudden appear around that group, and that can be so harmful and so damaging. So like, it's so important to be self-aware, even as you're experiencing the joy of being in community with people, to realize that there's people on the other side of those fences now. So like, continue to like break down the fences and don't be a circle with your backs to the outside world.
Absolutely. Oh man, that picture you just said, circle with our backs outside, is like, yeah, that's it. That is it. Truly. Oh gosh, you guys are the best.
Danny, I went and I did all this research, Ijeoma, and got her on Instagram and saw that same live piece where she talks about the name. And one other thing that she said that kind of reminds me of this chapter too, was that when someone is telling you about your privilege, or someone is explaining to you or sharing with you their disadvantages, or it could be their name, that we often have the urge to explain it in our own framework. We often have the urge to explain it like in my own, oh, I know what you mean because this happened to me. And we have to take a step back and say, no, that's your experience, but you're also negating that other person's experience by trying to put it within your own like framework, which I thought was really, another one of those moments where I was like,
Yeah. In continuing what you were said, one point that I really forgot about that whole conversation was that we feel that if we don't connect with somebody's story or are able to make their story similar to a situation where we've had, or if we don't have a way where we can just say, this happened to you, yes, this happened to me too, if we don't have a way to do that, that sometimes we think it didn't really happen, or it's not true, or we make it something that's like, that can't be, because we don't recognize it, we don't realize it, we don't see it. And really, a lot of the times it's like, maybe we just need to not resonate with what they're saying, but just hear them, like really hear them, listen to them, and understand that they have a story too, and it can be completely different from mine. But I also need to recognize that and understand where the faults are, and where, their story holds their truth, and just understand that. Like, I don't need to understand from a point of, I've lived this too, but understand this is their story and this is what the fuck happens.
Yeah.
Which going off your point, Kim, from what you were saying.
That's a really solid point.
Yeah, and it's good to be uncomfortable in that moment, to be like, why do I feel the urge to do that, or why do I feel the need to do that, and even examine that too.
It's crazy.
That's something I've been trying to work on a lot, especially with staff, and trying to be like actively listening and things. And it's like, if someone's grieving, and it's like, so many of us are so quick to try and like comfort people by relating to them or telling them your story, and it's like, that's not actually helpful. Like, maybe now is not the right time to do that. Maybe it's time for you to just hold space for this person that's going through a thing, or that you just don't understand, or even if you do, you still give them the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's funny. I just got my tarot. Okay, not related. I just got my tarot read, and my light maker said, sometimes you have to know the difference between somebody wanting to vent and them needing advice. And this is like, yeah.
Yeah. I will say, personally, I do sometimes struggle with that, but I'm learning. I'm trying to learn more about it, and like listening to like the IG Live that IG Alma put on, when she started to make that point about saying we don't have to relate to everybody's story. We don't have to have a story that's linear to everybody else's we hear. Sometimes we just need to hear their experience and understand where it went wrong.
Yeah.
And that's it. And that's all that's really what matters. That's the point of it. So, and I'm like, that really does make sense, because I think sometimes I jump in too much with like trying to relate to somebody, and I end up not relating to them. So it is a very good point.
I think that's a very human thing to do, though. We all want to feel connected to people somehow, right? Even if it's through their experiences.
Yeah.
So I can understand why, like, psychologically, it's like instinctive thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dope. All right. I say we talk about chapter 5. All right. What is intersectionality and why do I need it? Okay, I'm not gonna lie. When I first started reading this paragraph, I had no idea where she was going with this. I was like, wait, why did you go upstairs, girl? What's going on? But yeah, so I think a great place to start here is on page 72. She breaks down intersectionality really well. So let's see. Everyone's read it, right? Just want to make sure, because I'm going to kind of skip. Cool. Kim, you've read it?
Yeah, I've read it.
Yeah, awesome. Sorry, I had to slide on my phone. I couldn't see all your faces. Okay, so let's start where it says I'd seen the consequences. So I'd seen the consequences of this sort of anger at people. This is right after she talks about what happened on Twitter, right? Who demand that their various identities be taken into account when discussing larger social groups. And I'd seen how quickly this anger can turn into a full-scale online mob. I'd seen how these campaigns of harassment can take on a life of their own, lasting weeks, months, even years. I knew that it could lead to doxing campaigns where angry internet vigilantes publish your home address and work info to the masses. All right, let's fast forward and go to page 70. 73, last paragraph. I breathed a sigh of relief at the crisis averted, but then I was almost as quickly overcome with sadness. All I had done was express anger at the abuse of Black women. All I had done was ask people to care about us as they did about others. All I had done was ask for the fight for Black lives to include Black women too. And for that, I had to block tens of thousands of Black people, my people, who wanted me to pay for my audacity. Let me tell you, when I read this, it is awful to say, but I was like, I've experienced this and it is awful. And it doesn't make any sense to me why trying to defend one group of people also means that you're against an entire group of people. Logically, that makes no sense.
It's like when people are making a semantic argument as to why Black Lives Matter is like a dangerous statement. And it's like, yeah, we didn't say only. Like, we're just talking about this. It's okay to talk about a specific thing, right? Is that not okay?
Yeah, it's a very dangerous thing. It is very dangerous. And I feel like I get into this rabbit hole. I don't mean to like get into an entire conversation that is, you know, a little problematic, but when we see stuff like this happen, even in our sector, it's like someone speaks up about a very unpleasant or even sometimes awful encountering, and it's immediately they're against the entire food and beverage industry. It's like, no, this is one person, this is one experience. It is, I think I'm still surprised every day when I hear people say that the negativity comes to them for just speaking up. And I think it's something that we obviously need to definitely be better about as a collective, not, you know, us, but yeah. Any comments about like that incident and what your initial thoughts were there?
I mean, it makes me thankful that I'm not a public figure, because it's nice to be able to workshop ideas in the public sphere without having to like first put up like all the armor that you have, because you know there whatever you say is involved retaliation.
It also kind of made me think of cancel culture for a second.
Yeah, and Lauren, I know you and I have talked about this a lot in depth, and like it is just, it's so weird how the internet and social media can be such a positive like push in the right direction, but can also be so damning at the same time. Like it's such a weird balance of like good and evil, and it's almost like what you make of it, what you take is what you take from it. You know, so for like some of us who use these social media to reach out and to learn from certain people who are aligned with your message, it's like that same social media platform is the same way that other people will use it to damn somebody for saying something that doesn't fully align, instead of just understanding their experience and understanding the real definition behind what they say.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and this also right here, the importance of understanding into the message, like not just the message, right? So do you have a like Black Lives Matter or whatever, right? So you have a company who's promoting a message, and the message sounds great, but what leads up to it and the details, the minor details that are incorporated, it's really important for us to understand those before just standing and, you know, solid with the message. And this proves it, right? I mean, we all knew about, she didn't need to say it. You know, it's crazy. Ah, man, this got me all riled up, I'm telling you.
This, like kind of reminded me of a lot of people that try and it kind of brought me back to the first chapter, or the chapter that she was like at coffee with her friend when he was like, well, if we fix the class issue, then that'll fix itself. And it's like a lot of like, and then it also reminded me of a lot of like the kind of the behind the scenes thing that we found out about. I don't know if anyone knows about like the Women's March and, you know, what all went down with that, of like between like the white leadership and then the woman of color leadership with the Women's March. But it kind of made me think about that, where it was like, or, you know, in the very beginning, like, and then you hear about like the suffragettes and the women's movement, like, you know, went back in the day, where it was like, this was started by women of color But white women were like, okay, but we're going to lead the charge first, though, because we're a little bit more palatable to these people. So they'll give us rights and then we'll come back for you at this. And then they never did. You know what I mean? Like, it made me think about that, where it was like, okay, so if you're not considering intersectionality, it's always like we're going to put the person with the most amount of privilege front facing. They're always going to get the first look, and then it's like it's almost like trickle down economics. You're like, that's not actually ever going to be a thing. But that's how we like package it up to people.
Yeah, I think it's that's also just because that's how we were fed information our entire lives. I think even when we look at the way that history is taught in educational school systems, like it's always that's really the white, the white man is the one in power and the black man. So like, and again, this is instilled in us. This is like what societal norms are. That's literally it. So unfortunately, I mean, you saying that clicked in my head, and I was like, yeah, that's crazy. It's so insane that we do that. Let's see.
I really liked on page 78 and 79
Right.
about like adopting intersectional practices. I thought those were really, really great, and it kind of reminded me of some things of how some companies have like gone too fast to try to do one thing and ended up of leaving out other groups. But I love the quote at the very end of page 79 that if you don't do this, if you don't embrace intersectionality, even if you make progress for some, you will look around one day and find that you become the oppressor of others.
Yeah.
It's really powerful.
I think the other thing that was really cool about the way she broke this down. Is there an echo, by the way?
A little bit,
No?
but it's
Okay.
not. It's fine.
Okay. The way she broke this down is great, because I feel that sometimes I feel like I said this before too. We feel like we either have to go all in it or we can only do a little bit. And this really displays and shows you that that's absolutely not the case, that you can incorporate this in the practices that you're already doing. It just refining the ideas, which is an amazing thing. Yeah, that quote is a great one at the end of 79.
Yeah, this to me, like, I really loved this chapter and the breakdown of it, because it's like, I think Kim was saying, like, it's like the oppressed becoming the oppressors. This is like a conversation, something I think about a lot in like my political thoughts. But so it's like things like when she says, like, when you're talking about like the LGBTQIA plus issues, for the most part, who are centered are cis white gay men, and that's something, especially now that the world is starting to talk about, like, a lot of white gay men being problematic in a lot of different areas. But it's like, oh, but I'm gay. But so it's kind of like, oh, well, I'm marginalized in this area, and I'm only going to focus on my one area that I'm marginalized, but I'm not going to pay any of their attention to the areas in my life which I'm privileged, and then therefore I'm going to go out and cause a bunch of harm. But you're also, so it's like, yeah, you are still marginalized, but you can't just accept your marginalization without also accepting your privilege too.
It's almost like,
Yeah.
it's almost kind of leading back to practice what you preach. And I think that's really what she's trying to focus on. Is it's not about, one group or one, area is more important than the other, but it's about taking these things that you've learned within your own fight against your own your own background, but also utilizing that and realizing that it's a much bigger picture. So I feel like in all of that it's like, okay, let's not lose focus of your message here. Let's just expand on it.
Yeah, this is kind of goes back to what you were saying on page 62 about if I were to go along thinking that my degree was 100% due to my efforts and all the benefits that I received were 100% deserved, it would then require that I think that those who did not benefit deserve to not benefit. Which is so true. It's like you can't pick and choose. You have to be consistent across the board.
Yeah.
It's like that's the lie of meritocracy, you know, like we are so invested in thinking that, especially in America, especially under capitalism and, you know, kind of under the surface, under white supremacy, that anything that is gained is deserved or is earned, is just, is fair. And like it's like so stinging to our very core when that is proven to not be the case, or that we have to negotiate with ourselves and realize that, well, shit, like, yeah, I did get this promotion or this good thing happened for me. And it's like, well, there's a lot of larger systems at play that permitted that to happen. And, you know,
Yeah. Something Alex told me one day that sticks with me every day is not every great opportunity is your great opportunity, but also, more importantly, if you do believe it is your great opportunity, it's also your responsibility to ensure that you are making waves and paving the way for others to come.
she's full
Absolutely.
of wisdom, isn't she?
Yes. Oh yeah. I love that. I mean, that's kind of like, oh, I think I was actually in a meeting with my boss the other day, and it was myself and my counterpart Diorn, who it's like two women who run your whole spirits division, and then he was on the call with another one of our suppliers who are also two women. It was like him and our other counterpart Ian were the only men on this call, and he was like, "Can I just acknowledge how awesome it is that 2/3 of this call is women? I've never been in a situation where this has happened." And he was talking about how his boss was a woman, but she was a woman that never hired any women and didn't give them any opportunities. And it made me think of like, you know, I'm like, yeah, well, though, if we think about it, back in the day, like like a lot of women were taught that there was only room for one, you know what I mean? Like, and so it's like you come up, but you're not opening the door and leaving it open. You're like opening it and you're like operating from a place of scarcity. And it's like, yeah, it was wrong for those women to come up and not help anyone out after, but at the same time, this all is still rooted in the fact that men gave us this whole idea of there's so much scarcity and there can only be one woman and there can only be one person of color or one person representing these like marginalized groups, and that's it. So you can't bring anyone with you. And it took
Yeah.
a long time to shake that
It
off.
reminds me, yeah, it reminds me of those cartoons we used to watch as kids. There was always one woman, and she was probably white or black. There was one black kid, there was one Asian, and it's like, no, that's not the way the
And then there's
world
five
is, you
white
know?
guys. There's the nerdy guy. There's like
Yeah.
dude. There's the jock. You get every like that individualized. Yeah,
Or the character that
Yeah,
took
exactly.
I'm thinking of like the Power Rangers or like the Burger King Kids Club. You know, the kid in the wheelchair, but like the
Exactly. Degrassi, man.
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh,
Drake.
Drake.
Humble beginnings for Drake.
Oh
Graham.
man. Okay, I haven't read chapter 6, but I would love if we could at least get a conversation started, and then maybe we can finish it next week, or maybe we'll finish it today. Because it's I know it's good, but I want to hear about it.
Oh yeah. This one, like when she first, so the first story she tells is about the first thing is like just got pulled over for driving while black. This tweet she sent out when she was pulled over, and then she goes into the interaction with the police officer, and in that case it was like it was just a totally fine, like mundane whatever police interaction. And then she goes on to say like after when she was like they were done and they were driving away, and she's like we're tweeted out like we're all fine, you know, whatever. And then she says like, you know, we're not tweeting this to complain. We're tweeting this so that way our friends and family know that if anything happens, this is likely why. And then she was saying, like, for the most part, a lot of the messages she got were from other Black people, like checking to make sure that she was okay.
Yeah.
And then, but she also got like a ton of messages from a lot of other white people that they were like, why do you assume it's about race? You have no proof it was anything other than a traffic stop. Wouldn't it be better just assume good intentions on behalf of the cop? And then how do you know it was about race? And then she goes in and says, the truth is, I didn't know it was about race and I still don't. But, and then she goes on to list like the things that have happened
Yeah.
in her life that have informed why she thinks anytime getting pulled over is about race. And it's like,
Scary, man.
well, when you grow up with these examples of like these cop interactions that you've had your whole life, well, why wouldn't you think it was about
Yeah,
it's not, you know? And it was
that's
kind of like
crazy.
being followed by the, like in the couple chapters prior of like her being followed around a store by
Yeah.
a store clerk. She's like, I have no idea if that's why it was, but my entire life of experiences has informed this.
Yep. Yep. That's crazy. Yeah, it reminds me of a time I actually got pulled over in Jersey. The state trooper, it was not a pleasant experience, but so much to say is I always keep my license and registration in my like right above me so that I never have to reach down. And it sucks, but it's like I'm not taking any chances. It's not worth it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another thing I really got out of it too was just talking about the implicit bias with officers, black and white officers. And she said, one quote, when an officer shoots an unarmed black man, he says he feared for his life. I believe it, but that fear itself is often racist and unfounded.
Yeah. What page is that, Kim?
It's on page 93. It's on the bottom of the next to the last paragraph.
Sure.
One that starts with, and a large portion of police.
Damn. That's crazy.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
just this like implicit belief that like black man equals danger. So even though there's nothing there, he didn't even, he could have like not even had a gun. There's just this implicit bias of this is a dangerous person. So I'm fearing for my life and shot him, but just the implicit biasness of it is, I thought, interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There was a letter, an op-ed that came out a couple months ago. I don't know if anyone read it. It was like circulating on Instagram a lot, and it was like confessions of a former bastard cop. And
This sounds familiar.
It was this guy that had left, who was a cop and had left the police force and was pretty much just like airing out everything.
Oh,
and
yes.
what he actually did. This is what our training videos taught us. Like we were taught in police academy, like you are not going home, like to fear for your life. And it's like, and it goes into all the training that they get that like make them this way. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, even if if you're not a bastard cop going in, after you get done with your training, you're pretty much
the system is setting you up to fail, quote unquote. Man, I'm very excited to read this chapter.
Ooh, yeah, lots of feelings.
A lot of feelings.
It's heavy.
Yeah.
Heavy. I mean, I don't know if anybody else felt that way, but I felt it was just really heavy the whole time.
Yeah.
I mean, she comes at you rapid fire with so many facts and statistics interspersed with lived experience. And it's written, I mean, like this whole book, it's so incredibly succinct and powerful. It's like a battering ram.
Yeah. And it seems like every chapter, it's like,
yeah. But like we were doing grocery drop-offs in North Lawndale, which is on the west side of Chicago. It's where Martin Luther King lived for a couple months when he was in Chicago. And it's like, since 1968 has like there has not been a year of economic success in North Lawndale. It's like,
wow.
But like it's incredibly just, it's a very harmed community over the decades in so many ways. Just driving around there, there's just cop cars just everywhere, just doing loops around, just waiting for something to happen. And just thinking of living in that reality of constant surveillance and essentially the presumption of guilt, like something bad is happening around here.
Yeah.
We need to have a visible police presence so the community knows that whatever you do, we're watching. And it's just like, I can't imagine growing up in that sort of environment of constant surveillance. It's just got to be so crippling.
Yeah. Well, it's like with, conversations of defunding the police. So many people are like, well, everyone wants to just live in lawless chaos. What would that even look like? And you're like, it would look like the suburbs. Like, it would look like the suburbs that we grew up in. Like, like I said last week, I was like this high school kid that I was getting into it with, where he was like, you know, well, I've been arrested and I don't fear cops. And I'm like, well, that's incredibly, you know, privileged of you. But also, like, think about how we grew up. Like, we had park districts, we had funded schools, like we got to go around and like fuck around and do
Yeah,
stupid
you
shit
could go
and
to the
be
mall and loiter hard for hours
Yeah.
like,
without being told to move along.
yeah. And it's like, look, you know, in my personal opinion, you are never dumber in your entire life than when you're a teenager. Like, I feel like, you know, being a teenager is like the dumbest you'll ever be. And it's like, and kids that are not constantly surveilled by police are given the space to be dumb kids. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like they're just being kids.
Yeah.
I actually, you know, it's funny. I was a very good kid, I promise. But I think about some of the stuff I was doing as a child, as a Black child, surrounded by like a lot of white children. And had I not been in the white neighborhood, I imagine some of the very innocent things I did probably would not have appeared as innocent. Like we used to play manhunt at night with flashlights and just run around, and it's basically, okay, maybe do you know what manhunt is? It's basically like tag at nighttime. But we would
Just in the graveyard.
but we would play it neighborhood wide. So you're playing tag and you're like just running around. It could look suspect. And it is and then I hear about the people, because like I grew up in the South Bronx, but I went to school in the North Bronx. So I hear experiences and stories of like my peers who grew up but also like played and like hung out in the South Bronx, and their stories are very like different. They could not do that in those neighborhoods. So it is interesting.
Yeah, growing up, so my mother actually worked at the police station basically her whole life, her whole career of working, basically my whole life. And now doing the work that I do now, which I don't have any contact with her, so doing the work that I do now and seeing a lot of those things like that she was taught just from working in that environment every day. And like now seeing the things like, you know, when growing up, it was a very bad thing if I associated with people of color of any kind. And, you know, it very much, so a lot of the work that I do now, and the reason why I go into these conversations is because I'm trying to like really aggressively undo all of that. You know, when you grow up with that kind of stuff, it's like it carries on, and nobody wants to be wrong, or that, you know, when they love their parents and they think their parents are God, you know, they think, you know, my parents aren't wrong, they're right. And so, you know, you hear people that have grown up like me and that are like, well, you know, that's not true. But, you know, I'm like, I've seen it. I've seen it time and time again. Like, you know, I couldn't have friends that were people of color and it not look a certain way to my mother, and being told, well, you know, if you associate with them, you could end up in trouble. And I'm like, but I don't do anything wrong. Like, I'm not a bad kid. I don't do anything wrong. They don't do anything wrong. You know, we just are kids and we just fuck around. Like, we're just little fuck around kids. We do fucking bullshit. Like, and just thinking like, you know, they're in the same neighborhood as me. It's like, you know, these are the kids that hang out with me. Like, I'm not just going to not hang out with them. Like, they're my friends, you know? And like now growing up, it's like, wow, you know, that there was a whole lot of like background of racism, and especially LB fuck around kids. Like, you know, we just do bullshit. Like, we go and hang out at the creek and we just like ride our bikes around, and we go like to the next street over, we go over to their house, and it's like, you know, but now seeing like from somebody who has worked in the police with the police for so long, and I'm like, you have officers that I've met that are like Black and people of color, and it's like, what makes them different? Like, they're literally your people. Like, they're in these offices with you. I just didn't understand, you know. And it was like, it was such a different it was just so, you know what I mean? And that, so now, like, doing all of this work, it's just like, wow, like that was just incredible racism that was just bred by people that should be protecting the community. But really, if you actually look at it, they are taught to protect the laws. They're not taught to protect people and human beings. These police officers are taught to protect law. So we are completely expendable.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it is a breeding ground for, you know, and it is always looked at as Black people are bad people. They're always the ones. And it's like, no, it's not. But, you know, I'm like, these people are in my neighborhood. Like, what makes them bad? Like, we're in the same neighborhood. What makes me any different? You know, it's just so, but yeah, so obviously that's a much different perspective, but you know, it totally, but like reading chapter 6, it totally validated everything that she said. I'm like, that's completely valid. I know from personal experience in a different setting, all of her experiences are obviously completely valid, but it's just like, you know, that's totally right. And how do we change that? You know, and it also goes with in my parenting, the way that I parent, the way that I expose my children. It's like, how do I change that? How do I treat them differently? Because I grew up and it was totally different. And I definitely don't want that to seep into what I have now. So, you know, it's definitely a huge catalyst, because seeing these experiences and seeing, you know, people feeling like they're a target or they walk around with a target on their back. I mean, that the amount of like pain and anxiety, I couldn't imagine having that. And it's really sad. And it's really like, it's so messed up. So it's definitely, you know, it's definitely like, I definitely keep my ears open when it comes to hearing people's stories like that, you know, just because it's so true.
Yeah.
But I'm just rambling.
No, it's all good. I love it. You're passionate. It's great. And I just appreciate that, you know, we can have these conversations, and it makes me hopeful that more and more people are becoming comfortable talking about these topics. So, yeah, well, I appreciate y'all for coming. I think, I'll definitely have to catch up and read chapter 6, but, should we do 7, 8, 9 next week?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, damn, we're out of town next week. Okay, well, we'll come the week after.
Well, we could pause. I don't know. Well, how about this? We can do 7, 8, 9, and then we can do a short 7, 8, 9 the following week, and then go into 10, 11, 12.
Yeah, we'll
So
do
y'all just need to read 6 chapters.
I have a question. Are we going to continue until we finish this book? Like,
Yeah, we're gonna finish the book.
okay, cool. Because I was like, I can't just leave this off.
No, yeah, we're gonna finish the book. I feel like it's weird to just be like, all right, read the next 5 chapters by yourself, y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, awesome.
Hell
Well,
yeah.
this is fun.
Awesome. Well, thanks y'all for your time.
Thank you
Thanks
for
again,
hosting.
everybody.
Yeah, I'll see you all next week. Moni, I'll see you probably anyway on the internet or something. All right, bye everyone. Thank you for coming, Fiona.
Bye.
Bye.